Well, welcome everybody to Apostolic Encounters. This is your host, Jonathan Gray. Thank you for joining us again. And again, this week we are talking on the topic of marriage and ministry, and very excited to have some good friends, the Douglases from Chesapeake, on today. And it's good to have you guys on. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, bro. It's great to be on with you. Appreciate what you're doing. And I hate to correct the host, but we're from Virginia Beach.
Oh, Virginia Beach. Sorry.
It all bleeds together down here. If you look at a map, it's hard to know when Chesapeake ends and Virginia Beach begins. But having said that, I had to say I'm from Virginia Beach because, hey, Virginia Beach is better. I don't mean any offense to anyone.
But yeah, it's awesome to have you guys on. Really do appreciate it. Looking forward to an awesome time. Well, before we get started, I definitely want to take some time and pray. And we'll hop right in. Father, we come before you, Lord.
So thank you, Lord. God, thank you for the privilege, the opportunity to talk about those who today. God, I thank you for the joy of ministry. Thank you, Lord, for even greater the joy of my family.
Relationship with you, our relationship.
Lord, I thank you for leading us, guiding us, directing us.
What you want to do, Lord God. We worship you, we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So for those who do not know, and if you're outside the Virginia district, as far as United Pentecostal Church is concerned, well, I guess there are people outside the Virginia district who absolutely know who you are and love who you are. But for those who don't know who you are, who are the Douglases? How long have you all been married and in ministry?
Well, we are high school sweethearts. We met each other when I was 15 and he was 17. And we had a lot of ebbs and flows in those younger years, especially myself. But we got married. I was 19 years old and Chad was 21. We got married in April of 2002. So this upcoming April will be our 20th anniversary. And we were blessed with one daughter. She will be turning 18 in May and graduating from high school in June.
That's us.
Yep.
Well, name-wise, I'm Chad. That was Kristen. And our daughter, Alana, is the one she was talking about there that is grew up far too quickly.
Yes.
But, yeah, high school sweethearts. And I can tell you this. It's like the old song says, it gets better and better as the days go by. As far as that's how long we've been married, coming up on 20 years. That's who we are as a family. Ministry-wise, we both grew up in ministers' homes, so we've been involved in ministry from every angle, from cleaning toilets to student ministry to singing in the youth choir to the regular choir to leading worship, all of it, to now senior pastor. And we've been in pulpit ministry. I've been in pulpit ministry for about 25 years. And, it's been a tremendous joy. And I'm so thankful to I've been afforded so many privileges through the ministry. And so some of them include having served on national committees in the United Pentecostal Church, been involved in district leadership for about 18 years between Illinois and Virginia. By the way, we're from Illinois originally, so don't hold that against us. And all of you from Illinois may be listening. I love you. But man, I sure am glad to be in Virginia.
Yes.
But we now have the privilege of serving on the district board here in Virginia as Presbyter Section 1. And then most importantly, in terms of ministry, we just celebrated this month our 15th year as senior pastor family here at New Life Tabernacle in Virginia Beach. And so we've seen a lot of great things. We've seen, our church has increased about 500% since we've been here, had a congregational increase of about 500%, doubled a couple times. And we're just excited to be a part of what God's doing in the largest, by population, largest city in Virginia.
That's awesome. Congratulations also, by the way. I realized it was, I saw the pictures from it. It looked like it was an awesome time.
Yeah, we had a great time celebrating.
We sure did. In fact, we had so many from the district that came out. It was a real honor for us. In fact, your pastor, Brother and Sister Williams, they were there. Meant a lot to us.
Yeah. Oh, he loves you guys. Definitely loves you guys.
Yeah, that's a mutual feeling.
So I know we've had this conversation a little bit here and there, and I thought it would be a really good one to have, especially with people who have families and are in ministry,
right?
And they can feel sometimes as if either having boundaries or having the word no come out of their mouth and ask to do things or volunteer or when trying to build their family. You can feel sometimes like that's not the correct answer.
Sure.
And so I kind of wanted to get with you all about what got you, because I know the conversations we've had, you're like, no, establish boundaries, and we'll talk about that. But what got you to a place where you felt like you needed that separation between church and personal life, and to be able to begin to build those boundaries?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And by the way, just for the sake of saying it, it's a great subject. I appreciate that you're diving into it, because you're right, especially for younger ministers, that there's sometimes that's not real black and white. It's not crystal clear how important this issue of having some degree of separation between your involvement and your leadership in church and what's most important, which is your leadership and dedication to family. And so for me, I had the advantage of witnessing what damage can be done before ever becoming a minister. I've witnessed, because of the unique setting of being raised around pastors and ministry, I've witnessed the burnout of ministry. As a preacher's kid, and my wife is a preacher's kid as well. So preacher's kids, we observed ministers and families that were, literally destroyed by the burden and the heaviness of ministry. And so for me, going in, when I first was going in as a young minister to youth, more specifically beyond just, being used in the pulpit or whatever, but starting to take on positional leadership roles in the church, I determined that there were going to be some non-negotiables, and we'll get into those in a bit. But I determined right at the outset. And so for me, the cause of knowing the need for boundaries was I witnessed what happens when you don't. In fact, I would say this: I witnessed elders, great ministers, people's names we would recognize, teach from a position of regret when it came to their family, and basically saying, I wish that I had spent more time with my family, and their instruction was from a place of, don't do it quite like I did. And so I learned from that, and because of witnessing that, I determined before I was married that that's not going to be me. If I ever get afforded the opportunity to lead ministers and to instruct, I'm not teaching from a place of regret when it comes to my family. I want to teach from a place of success and as Paul would say, follow me as I follow Christ. I want to be able to say, here's an example of how you should do it, so that there is not collateral damage that has to be considered from my lesson. So, to me, I think the scripture makes clear that family was the first church. The family came before the church. And so I determined early on that my greatest calling is not pastor or preacher. My greatest calling is husband and father. And so that's what caused me to be determined that there had to be some separation, if you will, between the duty and the function of ministry. And the most important thing is the calling of my role as a leader of the family. And so that's for me. My wife may have a little more to add on that.
Yeah, and coming from the perspective of a female, for one, but more importantly, a wife, especially in this role, security is really important. Financial security obviously is a really important aspect of your relationship, but I feel that emotional and mental security is just as important. And we have given our lives under his leadership. Together, we have given our lives to serving people that God has entrusted us with. But one of my most valuable possessions that I have as a pastor's wife in our home is knowing that my husband would put me and my daughter first before the church if it was ever needed. If I was totally overwhelmed, or we were burnt out like he was talking about, or we got to a physical point in our bodies where our minds, our mental state was not good, our physical state was not good, I know without a doubt that my husband would do whatever he needed to do to supply what we needed in that moment. and put the church kind of on hold if need be. He's not only said it to us, but he's shown it to us. He's made our family a priority, and we have family nights throughout the month, and we take vacations, and it's easy to say, but I value that he actually does it. And to me, that has been a really important part of separating our personal life and church, that church is our life, but we are his priority.
Wow, she said that almost exactly like I wrote it.
I know from a guy's standpoint, we don't necessarily think of that, the emotional security that the wife has in that knowing. And so I appreciate that point of view. Again, last week when I was talking to the Sanzos, we had talked about, there is those moments where, especially as a guy in ministry, you see sometimes where, a man is all about ministry, totally forgets about the family, or, leaves it to the raising of the wife. It's like, hey, you handle home, I'll handle ministry.
Right.
And I agree with you. I've seen that fall through the floor, and you look around and go, what happened? And it traces back to, the foundation that they put. So with that, was there like any type of times that you all, like, he's like, hey, I want to establish a boundary, and there had to be some kind of, not negotiating, but just kind of like walking through why that boundary was important? Or has it been pretty much just kind of like every time you put in has been good?
I would say that it's pretty much, are you talking about between my wife and me, or between our?
Yes.
Yeah. I think that we've pretty much always been on the same page, and I take the role. You just touched on something so key, and probably we'll get into a little bit, but here in a minute, but taking my role as the leader, and not an authoritative, bless God, I'm the boss leadership. No. That's not what we're talking about. But taking my role as being the lead, the tip of the spear, so to speak, is something that I've really been intentional of taking ownership of. And so, being high school sweethearts, we've always been on the same page, I think, with this, because we just grew into it together. And so it's kind of always been that way. And so, but there are times certainly where we sit down and we kind of have just a little summit, so to speak, between she and I, and say, hey, you have to be flexible. One of the absolutes of leadership, you have to be flexible. And so we have grown in some of those areas of boundaries, and we've removed some where they were no longer necessary. I don't know that maybe any on the top of my head, but for instance, when our daughter was younger, they're just things that, they shift as you continue to grow in ministry and as you grow in life in different seasons and scenarios. But the intentionality of placing boundaries has always been something we've been very attuned to in terms of being intentional about. And so, we'll sit down and talk about and say, hey, I'm feeling, we need to make a change or an adjustment here, or a time, or whatever.
I think that if you look at children, all children, if you ask them, do they like discipline and structure, they're going to say no, because they want to do whatever they want to do, and they want to be free to do whatever they want. But in their true, genuine, if they heart to heart, they really do like structure. It matters to them. They go to school, they have a regiment, they come home, they eat dinner, they play, they take a bath, they go to bed. It's really important, that structure, even though they may not like it. And I feel the same thing is true with this statement with a husband and wife, that if we each stay within our role, and I've always respected him as the leader of our home, but I've allowed him to lead and guide us through the different seasons he was talking about, knowing that he values my opinion, but he knows that at the end of the day, I value him making the final decision, because as much as I value being able to submit to him, I also don't want the role that he plays of making the final decision. And so I give him that utmost respect, and he leads and guides our home when he feels that ebbs and flows need to be done or changed.
So with that, what are some challenges you guys face establishing boundaries as far as, in ministry, becoming senior lead pastors, when you're trying to establish boundaries with saints and people who are looking at you, and you said you've held national roles, and so there's the job description, and there's your, hey, this is not negotiable. So what are some things that you all have run into that you've had to navigate? How did you navigate them?
Sure. Well, tension is a good thing sometimes. So there's always a certain measure of tension when you're weighing, okay, I have a responsibility that I'm answering a call to, so I can't just act like, I can have no boundaries with respect to my responsibility in those roles. And so there's always been kind of a tension. And some of the tension has, if you want to call it challenges, or maybe even solutions to the challenges. I'd say one area that's been both a challenge, but also the solution is in the area of communication. Communicating, of course, as a husband and wife, but also with my church, making clear what some of the boundaries are. I think sometimes we underestimate the ability of our saints, and I'm speaking more from a lead pastor role, but we underestimate their even appreciation for a pastor saying these are where we're going to draw some lines or boundaries, or non-negotiables, whatever you want to call them. And so just clearly communicating, and when there are challenges and there's maybe some frustrations that arise, going back to one of the basics of relationships, which is communication, making clear. For instance, if we're going on vacation, I'll make clear, hey, we're going to be gone for a couple of weeks. Here's who's in charge. Here's who's taking the lead on these things. In our case, my dad is here, and so we have a bishop kind of, security blanket, if you will.
Right.
So communication with our leaders, with our church, communication amidst ourselves has been really key. I think if you're not a lead pastor, communication with your lead pastor to say, Pastor, this is what's going on in our home. This is where things are with our children, with whatever. So making sure that you're clearly communicating to your lead, whoever that is, as to what's going on. And so that's one of the areas that's both a challenge and a solution, is the area of communication. Some other challenges, there's simply seasons of busyness within ministry. That's a challenge. There are times that are busier than others. I mean, I wouldn't recommend a pastor taking vacation 2 weeks before Easter. I think that would be silly, But there are challenges. There's calendar obligations that you have. And so because the challenges, there are seasons of busyness in church life and work, especially bivocational ministry. And so I go back to the solution, which is communication, planning, proper planning, and taking the time as a husband and father, but also with your spouse, sitting down together as parents or as husband and wife, and just looking at the calendar, just like you would look at the calendar with any other obligation. Because a lot of times, unfortunately, it's family that's put last. As a minister, you put, okay, we got these youth obligations of the church or whatever your role is, and you put all those down, and then you look and say, okay, where can we fit family in? And I have, as the lead pastor, the advantage of setting ultimately the calendar. And so before we ever get to our church calendar or planning events or whatever, I know some of the typical seasons of busyness, like Easter or like camp season with the district. And we are very intentional about meeting that challenge of busyness by preempting, and then afterward, after those events, taking time and decompressing, going away, those kind of things. So the challenge of busyness is definitely one, but I think it's one that just takes some proper planning. Another challenge is finances. Pastoring is at times very tight financially, or just in ministry itself, because a lot of guys are they're not pursuing a career, so they're making ends meet, but they're pursuing the call of ministry. And so finances sometimes can be a challenge in both marriage, family, pastoring, and ministry. And so I think the answer, is there are going to be, those are some of our challenges that we've seen, that we've experienced. And so what I feel the key is intentionality and communication are the answers to all of those challenges. For instance, I mentioned the busy time. We talk about it. When I was youth president, I would sit down with Kristen and Alana and say, look, we know the next 2 months are going from planning to 4 weeks of camps, actually being at camp.
Right.
We know it's going to be crazy. So, just that communication of, hey, I haven't forgotten you. You're still my priority. We just know the calendar is what it is. So it's going to be busy. But guess what? Usually within a week or two of camp season, we're going on vacation. And so we would talk that up, in those moments of busyness, we would talk it up. Hey, 3 more weeks. We'd put a countdown calendar app on our phone and share it from time to time. And so you just communicate, you talk about, hey, it's busy now, but we're getting ready to have a blast as a family. And then even within the business, plan a date night with your spouse. Take a trip away for an evening or a day, something like that. And so intentionality and communication is the key to those challenges. Just schedule it.
Yeah. Or something as easy as just like, we love to go to Panera, and we'll bring a board game with us or a card game, and we'll get a dessert and a drink. And it's only a couple hours, but we don't talk about whatever the business is. We don't talk about church. We just focus on the family and play the games and have fun and laugh. And even that short couple hours of time can really decompress maybe some of the stress that you're feeling, but it is focusing on family time.
Yeah. I know, like, my personality, as you're talking about, something that's not necessarily huge, right? So going from there, playing a board game or card game and just getting away from church or ministry stuff. I know for me, my wife and I have had conversations around, like, I've got the personality that is very much so, I want to do it like big, or I struggle to do it at all.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I know for some people hearing it, it seems insignificant, but I know at times that I've done small, right? We've gone and done something small, but it's the impact it has been, substantial. So
absolutely,
for those who maybe struggle with that, don't feel like you have to always do something huge.
Absolutely. 100%. Yes. That's a great point. In fact, one of the building blocks, there are 2 key building blocks in relationships: communication, and then just simply time spent together. And of course, you put a little effort in thinking, and you don't always necessarily have to do the same thing. But just your kids are so intuitive, even at a young age. They get it. They know when they're the focus or not. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a big production or, super expensive. Just carving out the time is so key. It makes up for any, perceived lack of money thrown at something that's bigger in terms of production.
So I know you said communication being intentional and been the keys to you all having your boundaries. But as far as family goes, church goes, you said communication, has your boundaries, and you touched on it a little bit earlier, have your boundaries changed since? So obviously as your child gets older, there's some boundaries there that change. But were there things that you held like really close when you were, younger in marriage that now it's kind of like, it's not as important as seasons have changed?
I think the basic elements, no, they haven't changed. What I just said, actually, just carving out time, how the function of it, some has changed. And I think, again, back to communication, I'll say it this way. I think something that we established early on, but have improved on over the years, is creating a culture of family in our church as well. And of course, I'm coming from a lead pastor role, but we're very intentional of not just saying, hey, my family and I have priorities, but we're very purposeful in communicating you and your family need to have priorities. And so some of the for us, times have, and our daughter getting older has dictated that we, have to work now around her school calendar and things of that nature. And so, there are some certain functions that have changed, but I would say we have kept many of our boundaries in place simply by creating the right culture. Language creates culture. And so we talk about family a lot. We talk about our church being a family. We talk about the importance of families within the church. I talk about my family a lot. I talk about them, and I don't mean from a funny example of something my daughter did. I try to get her permission before I share those kind of stories first. But I talk about how important my family is. And so I would say the thing that has maybe changed is what I addressed earlier, and that is we make sure to schedule our family stuff before the church stuff. Before my preaching out calendar, I'm have the privilege of having preached all over, and so it's very busy. The calendar can get absolutely crazy. In fact, if I were to pull up my calendar and not remove some calendars, every day is filled most often in something. Wow. And it just can look overwhelming. And so really making sure to schedule our family stuff before. And I think one of the things that's helped us, and I'd say it maybe have changed over the years, is that I've made sure to inform people that you lose your filter as you get older, I guess, but and it doesn't have to be mean, but explaining to people that nothing gets in the way of these family priorities that are well planned out, with the possible exception of a death, something like that. Nothing gets in the way. And so that's one of the ways we've kept those boundaries, and even as different functions of them have changed, nothing gets in the way of that.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned is the art of saying no. Early on, that was a big challenge for me because I'm a people pleaser by nature, and I personally did not like to tell anyone no. So at my own expense, I would be up till midnight doing things for people. I'd be running around trying to accomplish whatever they needed, sacrificing my own mental well-being because I just didn't know how to say no. But I have learned that it's okay to say no when I know that it's something that I need to do as far as family time. Or if, there's literally days that it's been a busy couple weeks. We know it's a busy couple weeks going into it. And on a random Thursday, we put do not schedule on our calendar. And I literally could just sit in my living room and stare at the wall. And that's my activity for the night, just to decompress. And I'm not going to tell somebody yes that I can do something when I know I need that night. If I want to be successful in the weeks to come and all the other activities coming up, I need that night. So I think, oh man, I have to give them an explanation about what I'm doing. But then I'm like, no, I don't. My explanation is I'm really sorry that night I'm not available, but I can meet up with you on Friday or Saturday. What time would work best for you that night? And that night, I'm literally just going to stare at the wall.
Yeah, that's a great example too. That is something that has changed, because in the past we felt so obligated to tell people, well, we can't do it, and here's why.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you abuse it, or you should have a good relationship with your people, and if you do, then you can say, and based upon the culture you've created, that family is so important. Right. You can sometimes even say it. I'm sorry, that's a family night. We have something scheduled as a family, or like she said, it's already that time frame I don't have available. And it may just be for the sake of your mental health and your sanity, you're unplugging. And I don't know.
That's okay. That's what I had to realize. It's okay to do that.
It's absolutely okay. In fact, I think one of the things that really applies right here, and it may not be directly answering the question, but it applies, is as you grow older, you have better understanding of things and realities of things. And here's the reality. The pressure of ministry is like a two-edged sword. It's the two-edged sword of ministry is pressure and burden. And the positive element of that is that without the pressure and the burden of the ministry, we're not going to be productive. We're not connected or plugged into the importance of the role. And so without there being pressure and burden, we would be apathetic. And without those components, I wonder if there would ever be a real true sense of responsibility. But along with it, we know there's mental stress. Now, the mental stress can be good in terms of logistics and administration and budget crunching and all that, because it stirs us to action, and that tension can be a very positive thing. It motivates us to do. But the pressure and burden, equal to its importance is also how devastating it can be. The negative is that what I've learned in ministry and what has maybe changed in me is the understanding that enough will never be enough if we leave it up to the pressure and the burden. Gary Smalley,
Wow.
Dr. Gary Smalley said, he called ministry the tyranny of the unfinished. The responsibility is always there. There's always another person to minister to. There's always another soul that needs saved. And if you don't understand that enough will never be enough, and you have to make an intentional effort to make sure the boundary of family and time and rest, is absolute, then you won't ever experience it. The psalmist said in Psalm 46:10, and I quote it from the Contemporary English Version, but it simply says, "Our God says, calm down and learn that I am God." And so one of the things that's changed over our life with dedication to these boundaries is that we got to calm down. We have to understand it's the tyranny of the unfinished. There's always another battle to fight. And so we have to remove ourselves from the battle. The pressure is constantly a mental battle. It's battling for our time and our efforts. Our efforts is time involved in performing duty. Our thoughts, that's time involved in planning the performance of duty. And so that pressure is always constant. So since there's always something more to do, we have changed that understanding. Guess what? It can wait a day, or someone else on the team can fill that need if we're out of town or we have already obligated ourselves to family. It just comes down to priorities. And Brother Jonathan, I think it's important to say right here for any minister that's listening, and I think it's been said more or maybe more frequently of late, but it bears saying here that your greatest success or failure as a minister and a church leader will be whether or not your family is saved.
Yeah.
At the very least, to know you've done your best at ministering to and leading your family. We have to be able to say with integrity that my greatest accomplishment was that I gave myself to my family first before my ministry. And it just comes down to understanding. That's the thing that has probably changed the most, understanding that. And, many statistics that I've read tell us, I don't know if you know this, but it tells us, the statistics tell us pastoring and ministry it's like noted, not just you and I know it because we've experienced it, but it's noted by people that track these things. It's one of the most stressful jobs that you can be in. Ministry is considered one of the unhealthiest jobs you can enter into. I read an article a long time ago. It was a pastor that was speaking to an insurance agent in his church. And the pastor was inquiring about car insurance. And the agent had a good relationship with the pastor, and he asked him kind of mischievously, he said, hey, you want to see something that's really going to make your day? And he proceeded to show this pastor a document that pertained to life insurance from his agency, and it rated the danger professions. And the ministry, are you ready for this? The ministry was ranked in the same danger category as deep sea welders and loggers.
Wow.
As the second highest group rating of whom to give life insurance to. The ministry was behind crab fishermen, but they were ranked as more dangerous than munitions workers.
That's crazy.
We're more likely to die over time, of course, the pressure and the stress of it, more likely to cause us to die early as a result of our occupation before someone who builds explosives. And so I think just that understanding is a huge step in the right direction to realize this stuff matters. And I don't want to keep riffing here, but let me just say, I'll say one more thing here that I think applies in this whole understanding thing for ministers. No matter what level you're at right now, start making this an intentional thing. And that is, you need to think in terms of protecting your family. Understanding that a lack of intentionality in this area is dangerous. And so in the natural realm, if you perceived a threat to your family in a natural world setting, someone makes a threat or comes at your wife aggressively, I don't know about you, but there's absolutely no hesitation. I'm going to put him down if I have the ability to. And if I don't have the ability, I'm going to do my best to make sure that my wife and daughter are going to be safe.
Right.
And so you're instantly going to respond without hesitation. Why? Because you perceive the threat. You are able to perceive this as a threat. Well, what I've noticed is that too often ministers don't perceive the reality of stress and burden as a potential threat to their family and to their ministry. And so they don't do anything to protect their family until it's too late. And so my point is, understand that the the burnout, the stress, all of these things related to ministry can damage your family. And it's a very real possibility. It's a threat. So be intentional about the boundaries, be intentional about the time, and confront it as such, especially as the leader, as the man, the husband. Take it very seriously, because understanding that what affects you affects them is really key. And the sad reality is that wives, but especially pastors' kids, are falling by the wayside because they're feeling the pressure and that unrelenting, nonstop burden that the dad is experiencing. But what people fail to realize is that, or we don't think about, is that as dad, as husband, as the pastor, I'm called to handle this. I'm equipped and anointed to handle this, but my kids aren't. My child is not. And so they're not equipped to handle. I see preachers' kids not equipped to handle what their parents are going through. And so, it's dangerous for a man to think, well, I can handle it. Maybe true, but if you're feeling the pressure and you're feeling the strain and the burden of ministry, then your family's feeling it, and they're maybe not as equipped to handle it. And so you have to make sure the boundaries are there and the pressure valves are in place so that you can release that pressure, not just for your sake, but for your family's sake.
Wow, that was good.
So I'm sorry. I know we kind of went off the rails.
No, that was good. No, that's fine. That's fine. As you were saying that, the picture came to mind, as when you're driving and your body instinctively knows when you're going to hit the brake. So your body compensates for the turn or for the stopping or whatever. But all the passengers in the vehicle, unless you're telling them, they don't know to brace. Yeah. They don't know which direction, that you're going.
That's such a good illustration.
Seeing, when you said that, that was what came to mind. Because I know we've been driving before, and we're going to church. My wife knows the way that we're going.
Right.
I'm slowing down the turn, and she'll put her hand on the little thing. And I'm like, I'm not going that fast. She's like, ha ha ha. Right. She's bracing for that turn. But in the same way for our family, as people who are in ministry, mom and dad might know this is direction. But I have seen it where, the kids, it's almost like they're blindsided by that turn.
Right.
So true.
Stop. And so you're dealing with, the whiplash or, things flying around the car, the chaos that happens from that. So
yes. Absolutely. Great illustration.
Yeah, so question I have for you, Kristen, is as a wife, you all see things, from a different standpoint. You're talking about safety and security, and that being why you value structure. For a wife who, she and her husband are working in ministry, they've got a family. What are some keys to her being able to really support her husband at home? And I know communication is one of the things that you're saying is very key. But for those children who are growing up, how would you encourage a woman to say, hey, this is how you can support him at home?
Well, I think one area would be to make your home a safe haven. Most times men have offices at the church, and so they handle all their business at the church. Of course, we take meetings and we listen to people's problems at the church. One thing, which at this point in our life, we're living in apartments, we don't really have room for it in our home as well. But my husband's always mentioned, I don't want an office at my house because I don't want to bring those conversations, that conflict that he has to deal with, the pressure that he has to deal with at the office into the home. So I think as a wife, I feel that creating a safe haven. So when he does leave the office, when he does leave the prayer meetings and the counseling sessions and he comes home, our home is clean, it's tidy, it's a place of comfort and rest for him. It's not some place that we try to, I mean, you're going to talk about church stuff, but limited, because just like everybody else leaves their secular job and they can leave it at the job, I can walk away and I can worry about it when I get home. We'll talk about it for a short time, but that's not all we need to talk about. We need to talk about just our family and trips and things that make us happy and make jokes and do whatever we want to do to make it a place of rest, and not always everything is focused on that. And I also feel another thing when it comes to your children as a wife in a home is safeguarding them from always talking about church issues. When they go to bed, you can talk about those kind of things. Talking negatively about people or situations that are very prominent in our mind. It's really, really hard when you're presented with a church issue. A family comes to you and they say, you know, this is what we're going through, and they dump all this stuff on you and then they walk away. Well, you as humans still have to process that. And one of the ways that our family works is we just talk a lot about it. My husband is an excellent communicator. I was not raised to be an excellent communicator, and he had to teach me, because if I didn't like something or something was bothering me, I just wouldn't talk about it. And so he taught me the art of the importance and the value of communicating. But I know that as a wife and in our home, especially in front of our children, we have to safeguard them from things that they don't need to know about. Just because we're carrying that burden and we're carrying people's problems, our children don't need to carry that. They're kids. They're not meant to carry that. And so I think something that I would strongly suggest is pick moments when your kids aren't around or when they're in bed, or you can go away without your children there and you can share with each other things that are going on or what you're thinking or how you're feeling, but make sure that it's not always in front of your children.
That's good. Good.
That is good.
So last question I have for you all is for those who have not, maybe they're several years into being in ministry, married, have a family. Maybe they've wanted to set boundaries, but they just maybe didn't know how or where to start.
Right.
What would you say? What advice would you give to begin to put those boundaries in place?
A great question. It goes back to the creating a culture thing that I addressed earlier. My wife mentioned as well, creating a culture, first in your home that validates everyone in the family, and makes clear that family comes first and then ministry. If you're the lead pastor, creating a culture in your church that appreciates and honors pastor and family. And when you can set the culture right, then there's room to put some details, if that makes sense, into the culture. And so some of that culture, again, I go back to, I want to affirm my family publicly. I try to make sure that they I've even said pastor's wife from the pulpit. It's one of the most underappreciated and overworked positions in the church. Not because our church doesn't try. It just, there's so many unknowns to most people about how much pressure is on them. Right. Same with kids, there's pressure on kids. And so making that culture of the family is the most important, even more important than the ministry. My family is more important than my ministry. Now it's almost, like, Bruce Wayne and Batman. Is he Bruce Wayne or is he Batman? There's certainly a whole lot of mixing there, and my family is very much a part of my ministry as well. And so it's not just my ministry, and I have disconnected them from it. And so they're engaged in it to the measure of which they need to be. I don't put pressure on them to be pulpit speakers or something like that. Well, I did volunteer my wife one time for a ladies' conference, but that's only because I knew she would crush it, and she did. But anyways,
in Thailand, so that's a whole nother story. Yes.
I digress. But a couple of things. One of the things, I've already mentioned the culture, affirming publicly as the husband and pastor. I think one thing that husbands should do right now, if they haven't already, is they need to determine that you will not allow your wife to be overwhelmed, perpetually overwhelmed. And you have to know when this is. This isn't her job to tell you. Every man that will listen to this, I hope they'll receive this. Of course, communication is key, and she probably will say, I'm just feeling the pressure. But most of our wives, because they have been equipped to endure, right, they will endure more than they should.
Are you still there? I think I lost Joe.
Of working full-time outside the church, she was, for a time period, she was the church secretary. She was working full-time. She was a Sunday school teacher. She was leading our journey class, which was our new worshipers, and right, she was working full-time, and she was small group on Wednesday, and then she was a wife and a mother, and she helped with guest follow-up, and she was working full-time. She was a ladies director with the ladies conference and Esther conference. I mean, she was doing so much. And right, after I for being an absolute idiot, I took her out of several things. I was like, what this, there's way too much. You're gonna lose your mind if we don't do something here. She didn't tell me. She didn't say, babe, can I let something go? I took a moment to look at all the things she was doing and frankly doing them well, doing them with excellence, and said, no, this is not it. First of all, it wasn't needful. More importantly, it wasn't helpful to her. Yeah. And so that's one thing that I would say you need to make sure, as the man of your home, as the leader of the home, that you are keeping a finger on the pulse of your family and what they're dealing with. And so that's one thing. Then I think there are some non-negotiables that we would share, try to do quickly. I don't know how much time you plan for these, so you just let us know if we're going too long. But there are some non-negotiables that we set for us. And so I'll go first on the non-negotiables. The first one was we've talked about this a little bit, but one non-negotiable is we schedule our family time. And how that looks in the detail is we endeavor to have one day a week away from the church stuff. For us, it's Mondays. Others have different calendars and different obligations. But you need to take a day where you're not talking about, thinking about, and overwhelmed with church stuff. So we take one day a week. And then, by the way, it's amazing to me that preachers that preach on the 10 Commandments fail to realize that the 10 Commandments, within the 10 Commandments, God talks more about taking a day for rest than he does any of the other ones individually. And so we schedule one day a week away from the obligations. We endeavor to schedule once a month, even if only for a day, to get out of town. The pressure and, more importantly, the burden of ministry is a lot of times location focused. You are called, for me, I'm called to the city of Virginia Beach. There's a burden and a target on my back in that city, like there is nowhere else. When I'm away, I don't feel that burden and that constant pressure. And so it's important for a pastor to get away. And I think that trickles down to, different positional pastors within a church structure. Get away for a day. If you don't have the money to stay overnight, just leave town, go do something as a family. So schedule those times. And then the other ones that are bigger and sometimes it take more money and a lot more planning, but we are religious, pardon the pun, with our vacations. I'm going to take my wife. Sometimes it's not as long, but I'm going to take her away for our anniversary if we have the means to do it. And then we are going to take about 2 weeks as a family for our family vacation in the summer. After the busyness of camp season's over, whatever, me and my wife and daughter are going to go, and we're going to make as best we can with finances an epic vacation, a time where we're totally unplugged. And I recommend at least 10 days if you're a lead pastor, because it takes 4 days to unplug. It takes 4 days to get your mind off of it. And if you're only gone a week, then you have 2 days, and then you have to come back and get plugged back in. And so that's something we have made a non-negotiable. We're going to go on vacation for 10 days at least every year. And then make holidays important and big for your family. Even if, you're not into them, your kids are going to be into them. And so those are
what you mentioned earlier about it having to be big or not do it at all. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can it's intentional and it's memorable. So it can be free events. It could be crafts that you do at home. It could just be baking cookies together. But every year they know Dad and Mom are going to take some time, and we're going to bake cookies together for Christmas or whatever.
So true. Yeah. So that was, I will lead off with the first non-negotiable is the issue of scheduling time. And I'll say this, something I remember Brother Raymond Woodward saying, who I think is one of the greatest teachers in our generation. He said there are 3 building blocks to any relationship: time, and time. So can't stress it enough. First non-negotiable is our time is very precious. I'll let you go with the second one, babe.
Communication, which we've hit on a little bit already, but you don't have to be a master at communicating. It's something that I've learned. You just have to do it. You're going to say stupid stuff. You're going to mess up sometimes and not say the right thing, but communicating is way better than non-communicating. So with your family, intentions, directions, guidance, with your church and leaders, this is what I expect, and this is how I want it to be. We communicate very clearly. Mondays are not business days for us. We'll receive text messages. And if it's church related business, it will sit until Tuesday, unless it's an absolute emergency. We just won't respond. And our people are okay with that. Vacations, they're sacred. We're getting away. We don't want to think about church. We take our rule of thumb when we leave for family vacation is on whatever day we leave, we get 2 days from the first day of traveling into the middle of the second day. We'll get everything church related out of our system, and then we don't talk about it. I don't want to know what your vision is for next Easter. I don't want to know anything going on unless it's something life and death. And even then, we've communicated with our leaders. You talk to Bishop, and if Bishop feels it's important, he'll communicate to us. If not, he'll take care of it. And the third thing that we have really learned,
third non-negotiable,
it's a non-negotiable, because especially our leaders, some of our saints, but definitely our leaders, is your lack of planning does not constitute an emergency on our end. If we have a big event coming up and they were in charge of something and they kind of dropped the ball, and all of a sudden they're reaching out to us like, I need you to help me with this and I don't know what to do. Listen, you've had plenty of time to plan this. You should have come to me earlier. I'm not going to adjust my schedule in my life and wreck, havoc in my life because it's an emergency that you need to fulfill. And now all of a sudden you're putting it on me. So it's a non-negotiable. You take responsibility for the things you were assigned. If it doesn't get done, it doesn't get done. If it gets done halfway, then that's okay. Just do your best.
Learning moment.
It is a learning moment.
And I know that may sound like we're harsh. We're not. It's just in training. That's what we make sure the culture is identified.
It teaches them to grow.
Yeah. The responsibility is on you. Take ownership of it. Yeah. So fourth non-negotiable. And if there's any point we need to stop or you want to interrupt us, you holler. The fourth non-negotiable is don't make money sacrifices that'll always put the ability to do things with your family on the back burner. Because we know that our families as ministers, they're going to have to sacrifice, and that's fine, but we have to commit to not sacrificing our families, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so, I tell ministers, if you and your wife haven't had a date night for 2 months because of finance, the last thing you need to do is say, well, bless God, I'm going to support another missionary. I'm going to go call so-and-so and just bless them. No, you need to honor your marriage vows and bless your wife with attention and finance. And so, your wife and the vows of your marriage are more important than your missionary support or PIM. It doesn't mean they're not important. It just means they're not as important. And so don't make money sacrifices where your family is the only one ever suffering. So make sure your commitment to them far outweighs the sacrifice you're asking them to make. Your commitment outweighs their sacrifice as husband, as father. And so I committed a long time ago, and I believe that I've been fortunate to have, and see ministerial success. I've been very blessed in the opportunities I've been afforded, but I refused a long time ago. I prayed it literally, and I teach it. I refuse to offer my family on the altar of ministerial success, and so keep an eye on what you're requiring for them to sacrifice, and don't sacrifice money all the time if it means you're never going to be able to spoil them.
Wow.
And so I'll go into the fifth one, because I think this maybe is the husband that needs to take the initiative as well. But another non-negotiable is the importance of 20 minutes a day of meaningful conversation as spouses, with your spouse. And so the background from that is I was reading a guy by the name of Dr. John Gottman. He said this. He said, I recommend turning toward your spouse at least 20 minutes every day, because we talked about busyness earlier, because he said even in busy times, anyone can make 20 minutes available. And so his point is your spouse's relational batteries need to be recharged, and they will be recharged when you attend to his or her needs in such a way. So by quote unquote turning toward, he means interacting with each other every day through positive words, affirmation actions, affirmative actions, and not just church business or the busyness of the season you're in. Take 20 minutes a day, be intentional, sit down, whether it's over coffee or whatever, look in each other's eyes and talk about you, talk about your family, talk about the things that are coming up, talk about the vacation that needs planned or whatever. So that's a non-negotiable. Even in the midst of busy times, try to carve out 20 minutes a day of meaningful conversation at the least.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Number 6, prayer, which I think is a pretty obvious one, but it still needs to be stated that a non-negotiable is every day there needs to be prayer. There needs to be a time that even in the busyness, we preach it and we teach it. Sometimes I think we forget how valuable it is for us to obviously do it. And I'm not saying that it's just a known that you should be praying, obviously, but you need to be intentional about what you're praying and how you're praying, what you're praying for. And number 7, spend time with friends. Find friends that you can be yourself with. Find friends that are on the same plane that you're in, the same level of life that you're in. We are very family oriented in our church. I think we've established that, and we are very open with our people. I try my hardest to be real with them and down to earth with them and relatable to them. But I also have learned sometimes, and the hard way, to be honest, that I can't be fully open and transparent.
Right.
I can't be everything and open with them about everything about my life and my feelings, because we're in different planes, and there has to be a level of respect, and there has to be a limit there. And I think that it's so important that you find friends that are on the same level with you, that you can do a weekend away with, that you can do a holiday with, that you can reach out to and say, hey, I'm struggling with something right now. I need you to pray with me. I can't reach out to all my saints and do that, but I can reach out to friends that have like-mindedness that we're in, and the ministry calling that we have, and
Right.
let them be those that you can be yourself with, but they also kind of revive you as well. And they're there when you need them.
Absolutely. It's great. And that's one of the privileges of ministry, is that at some point you're going to be able to come in contact, whether it's a committee you serve on or whatever, that will create a lifelong friendship. Really value those. Number 8 is don't permit the pressure of measuring up to be placed on your kids. Let me define that. I hated to hear, well, he's the pastor's kid when I was growing up. And something Brother Charles Grisham, when he wrote The Minister and His Family, he said, a minister should never impose the undue pressure of extreme perfection on his children because they're PKs. And so your kids need to receive validation apart from being the pastor's kid or the preacher's kid or a minister's kids. I love what Steve, I don't even really know a lot about him, but I read one time a quote from a guy named Steve Murrell, who absolutely just blew my mind with this phrase. He said, quote, I'm not raising good pastors' kids. I'm raising good Christians. And so, my goal is not to keep my kids from embarrassing me. It's to raise them to love God. And so we have to endeavor to not make an example of our kids from the perspective of, you got to measure up because you're the PK. You got to measure up because I'm the pastor or whatever. And I'll go a step further. Even in your preaching, you got to be careful with using your kids as an example. It's not your church's business to know when you whipped your child and why. Right. It may make a great preaching point, but your poor child is sitting on the pew mortified and embarrassed, and it's just not worth the good illustration point you might get. And so I'll just say this: if I use my wife or daughter as an illustration, more importantly my child as an illustration, I ask her first. I know that sounds silly, but I ask her first. I call her kiddo. Kiddo, do you mind if I share such and such? If she says no, I don't go there. So that's the non-negotiables. Just refuse to permit the pressure of being the pastor's kid or the preacher's kid to be something they're living under. Just raise them as good Christians. That doesn't justify letting them get away with whatever. That's not if you know my daughter, that's not the case. But it's not fair to them though, that all of their identity is wrapped up in, well, they're the pastor's kid.
Right.
And you can refuse to let that happen.
Yeah, I know when I was talking to Jordan Easter, and I asked him about that. And he said one of the things that he appreciated about his dad so much, his mom, was they never were like, Jordan, you're going to be this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're going to this.
Absolutely.
More so, how is your relationship with God? How are you doing?
Yep.
And as long as you're walking with God, as long as you're doing the things that you need to do, then you're good.
Absolutely. And validate them in what they've identified they're passionate about, not what you think they should be passionate about as a preacher's kid. Like my daughter now she's heavily involved in the media side of our ministry with respect to photographs, and she loves it. She's passionate about it. I never one time said, I want you to plan to be, the youth leader or a singer or whatever. I've encouraged her, validated her in the roles that she's passionate about, while, like you said, encouraging her, have a walk with God, love God's people. So anyway, we have two more non-negotiables. One of them is just simply to stop. That's a non-negotiable. Every once in a while, you just got to stop. I remember years ago, I was holding my daughter on my lap. We were kind of snuggling, and I would frequently check in with her and just kind of ask her, "Hey, how am I doing?" I ask her, how am I doing as a dad, kiddo? There's some things you're struggling with. What's going on at school? Those kind of things. And one day I asked her, and she said, "You're doing great, Dad." And I said, "No, really, really tell me, how am I doing? Am I spending enough time with you? Is there anything, whatever?" And she immediately said, "Okay, there is one thing." And at the moment, we were sitting in my, comfy chair. I had my laptop on one leg. I'm a big guy, for those that don't know me. I had my laptop on one leg and my daughter on the other leg. And I had my phone on the table beside me. And she said, "There is one thing." And she pointed at all this, and she said, "You could spend less time on that and that," pointing to the computer and the phone. Wow. And so one of the things I would say to pastors and leaders is, you just have to stop. The world's not going to fall apart. So it's a non-negotiable. Every once in a while, for your sake, just stop. For your family's sake, just stop. And biblically, the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 10, verse 15 says, and it's from the Good News version, it says, "Only someone too stupid to find his way home would wear himself out with work." So just stop.
Yeah.
And the final one is follow through on promises. Just be there. I think that one of the things that we have the privilege of being a part of is the technological age of our cell phones, but it also can be a hindrance because it's so readily available. Anything you want, everything you want, it's right there. And it's almost like if we don't have our phone with us in our hand 24/7, then we're missing out on something, or we are so connected that we can't disconnect. Like a text message come, I got to respond right away. And that's just not how that needs to be in life. So a non-negotiable is to follow through your promises and just be there, not just in body, but when you're with family or you're with a saint in the church or you're having a fellowship, be present, be in the moment, really focus on where you're at. Don't be distracted by things that can wait till tomorrow. The business of the church per se can wait till tomorrow. Just be in the moment.
Yep. Wow. It's such a powerful thing. Thank you for letting us chime in on all this. I think one of my favorite quotes from Zig Ziglar is, he said, the saddest words in the English language are the words "if only." And I think when it comes to a minister and his family, that should keep you awake at night, in the sense that I got to get this right, because I don't want my recounting of my family, my children, the brief time. The older you get, the more you realize life is a vapor. Here today, gone tomorrow. I don't want "if only" to be words that I have to say a lot with regard to my family and time we could have spent together.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. That's so good. Well, thank you all for being on. I really do appreciate it. I always take notes when we're doing these.
Yeah.
And like almost a page and a quarter of notes from you guys just talking. So I definitely appreciate the wisdom.
Awesome.
As we're wrapping up, is there anything you all would like to share? Anything you'd like to say?
Baby, I'll let you go first.
No, I don't think so. I think that we're living one of the most blessed lives. Being in ministry, it has its ebbs and flows, and it has its good times. It has its challenging times, just like any other lifestyle or calling that we have. But knowing that what we're doing is impacting lives, it's so rewarding and it's so satisfying. And I think the one thing that I try to tell myself, life in general doesn't have to be hard. But for some reason, we try to make it hard. So if we can just follow some basic principles and things that we know that work. And some of the things we've offered today, they work. They worked in our lives. It's enriched our personal life, our marriage, our relationship with our daughter, the relationship we have with people in our church. And so I guess I would just leave it with, don't overcomplicate it. Don't make it hard. Just do it.
Yeah, that's a great send off. In fact, I would just support it by saying what she said. We do live a very blessed life.
Yeah. But
the greatest of those blessings is my family. I said it earlier. We've seen some success in ministry. We've been able to preach around the globe. I've been privileged to preach conferences from coast to coast in churches, and it just, all of those things, as wonderful as they are, I know this. There's a lot of things in ministry I haven't got right. There's a lot of things I got to work on. But there is one area in my life that I think every preacher and pastor ought to be able to say, if there's anything I know I've gotten right, it's my family. And that ought to be the testimony of every minister. Is I know there's things I haven't gotten right in ministry, but one thing I've gotten right in my life is my relationship with my family, and them being the priority of my life.
Yeah.
Again, thank you all. I really do appreciate it. And I know there are going to be people who are blessed by just hearing. Some people just need the permission to do something.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. They need to hear from someone that maybe is further down the road or have had experiences they haven't had, to know that, hey, you can be successful while making your family a priority. You can be successful in ministry. And again, we want to thank you for letting us be a part of this, and for just the opportunity to share. We love you and your family, man.
Yes,
we think highly of you guys. So thank you for doing this.
We love you all too. And with that, guys, we'll wrap it up, and we'll see you guys next time.
Sounds good. God bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.